Hello everyone, welcome to today's session. In the previous session, we were discussing the different Unix file APIs. So we have discussed about stat, fstat and lstat APIs, link and unlink APIs, access API and then chmod and then fchmod APIs. In today's class also we will discuss some more APIs, two more APIs, okay. Now we should discuss about the chown, fchown and then lchown APIs. So this is something but change ownership of files, okay. So these APIs will change the user ID and group ID of files, okay. So this is the prototype. Here we have the two include statements, unistd.h and then sysbar types.h. So we have three functions here, chown, fchown and then lchown, and we have three arguments here. The first argument is const char star path name. So this indicates the path name of the file to which the user ID and then group ID has to be changed, okay. And the second argument is the new user ID that has to be assigned to the file, and then the third argument is the new group ID that has to be assigned to the file, okay. So the difference between the chown and then fchown function is, in the second function, in the fchown, instead of path name, we have the file descriptor of the file to which the user ID and group ID has to be changed, okay. And the third one, it is similar to the first function, but the only difference is this is lchown function. That means we have already discussed the lstat function. So same concept applies here also. This function is applicable for symbolic link files, okay. So the return type of these three functions is integer. So the return values are 0 if the function is executed successfully, -1 if there is any failure, okay. So now let us write a program that illustrates the usage of this chown function. So this program illustrates the usage of chown function. So these are all the include statements. So let me go to the main function here. So the main function, we are passing the command line arguments here. Actually this chown means we are changing the user ID or group ID on a particular file, okay. So for this, during the execution, I can give the input like this. I will write the command here, ./a.out followed by the username and then followed by, so here I will write it here, okay, on the name of the file. Let it be sample.txt, okay. So here the argument count is 3, okay, and the argument vector argv of 0 means ./a.out and then argv of 1 means the username and then argv of 2 is the sample.txt. So we have already discussed about the command line arguments in the previous session itself, okay. So here first step, what I am doing here, I am just checking whether the argument count is less than 3 or not. If it is less than 3, that means there is an error. So this program should have at least 3 argument count. That means it should have the minimum 3 command line arguments including the command. So here 1, 2, 3, okay. If it is less than 3, then see error message. I am using the see error function to print the error message. Usage, I am saying that argv of 0, okay. Otherwise, if the inputs is given properly, so this condition will fail. So control will come here, okay. So what I am doing here, on the right hand side, I am calling the function get pwuid. So I am calling the function get pwuid. This function will convert the username into the uid. Actually this function will return the data of that particular username, okay. So that data is of type struct passwd, and this one of the members of this struct passwd is the user ID, okay. I will repeat once again. So we, through the command prompt I am passing the username, okay, but actually we have to change the user ID of this file, right? So we should extract the user ID of username. So what we will do, we are calling a function get pwuid. So this get pwuid function, this is used to retrieve the user ID from the given username. So how it will work? This function returns data which is of type struct passwd. Okay, one of the members under this structure is the UID which we are looking for. Okay, so that's why I am calling the function here, and on the left side the data type is struct passwd star pwd. Okay, so since I am making use of this function, in the header file pwd.h is included. Okay, so after this, and anyways argv of 1 means this one, argv of 1 the username. Okay, I am passing the username. For that, corresponding information along with the user ID will be stored in this struct passwd. Now in that complete structure I am looking for only the user ID. Okay, so I am looking for only the user ID. So what I will do now, I will refer to this pwd. I am making use of conditional operator here. So ternary operator, I am just checking the condition. If this pwd is not null, if it is not null, in that case I am extracting this pwd hyphen, I am extracting the user ID variable or user ID member to the particular UID variable. If it does not exist, condition fails, so -1 will be assigned to UID. So what I am extracting now, I am extracting the user ID from this structure. Okay, so from this structure I am extracting the user ID, and I am storing that to the variable UID which is of type UID underscore t. So this is the data type for the user ID. Okay, so that's why on left hand side I have created a variable UID which is of type UID underscore t. Okay, so next step, so let it be there, I will tell, I will explain this later. So next what I am doing here, I am just checking whether the user ID is valid or not. So how I am checking? Right now the user ID of the given username will be stored in the variable UID, right? So I am just checking the condition UID double equals -1. Actually -1 is an integer. Suppose if I have to convert this -1 to float, how I will write? I will do typecasting, right? Same way this integer is typecasted to user ID type, that means UID underscore t. So that's what I am doing here. Okay, if UID is -1, in that case I am printing the error message saying that invalid username. Okay, suppose if this condition fails, that means UID, the user is the valid user. In that case what I have to do, I have to change the user ID of the file. Okay, so I have to change the user ID of the file. So I have to call the API chown. So I have to call the API chown. So just now we have seen that chown function takes 3 arguments. The first one is the path name, okay, and second one is the UID, that means new user ID that has to be assigned to the file, and third argument is the new group ID. So as of now we can get the path name, that means the file name to which I have to apply the, I have to change the user ID, I can get this, okay, and then the second argument user ID, again I can get the new user ID, it is stored in the variable UID. What about the third argument, that means the group ID. So group ID on a file, that means I have to retrieve the group ID that is on a particular file. So previous session we have already discussed state API, state API is used to retrieve the file attributes of a file. Okay. So, using that function we can retrieve the file attributes, and in particular we can retrieve the group ID. So, that's why I am calling the function stat. So, argv of I. So, I will tell you why I have taken as I. So, anyways, as of now here the file means argv of 2. So, argv of 2, assume like that only, and then new user ID. So, new user ID is stored in UID. So, I am passing UID, and what about the third argument? So, here I have to get the group ID. So, group ID means I have to call from the state API. So, here state API contains the file name followed by the struct stat variable. Again, we have already discussed this in the previous session when I was explaining the state API. Okay. So, state V is a structure. So, since I have to make use of this structure state V, this has to be declared before using this in the program. So, the declaration is done here, stat state V. Okay, did you understand now why I have declared this state V? Okay. So, next I am just checking if it is 0. If you remember, state API returns 0 if it is executed successfully, right? I am just checking the condition. If it is 0 means I am able to retrieve the attributes of the file. Okay. So, next step what I am doing? I am changing the user ID of the file. So, chown, the first parameter is the path name. So, that is present here in the argv of 2, and then UID, the new user ID, and then group ID. So, if you remember in the previous session I have listed the members of the structure struct stat. Okay. So, among those members st_gid is one of the members that returns the group ID of the file. Okay. So, I am just passing the same group ID for this chown. Okay. Now, I am able to pass the path name, UID, and then the group ID. Suppose this is executed successfully. Okay. So, suppose if this is executed successfully, it returns 0 and everything will be fine. Suppose there is an error, I am just printing the message p error chown. Otherwise, if there is any other errors, even upon executing this chown successfully, there might be error with the state API. So, that is why I am printing p error state. Okay. And then I am closing the if else block. So, observe here we have used this for loop. Okay. So, for loop here, that is because by using the command or by using this API, we can change the user ID of more than one files. Okay. We can change the user ID of more than one files. Okay. So, what I have done here, the same set of activities or the same set of statements has to be repeated for all the other files. Okay. So, that is why since we are repeating this set of statements, we are making use of for loop. Okay. So, for how many times we have to repeat? Till the argument count. Okay. So, here we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. The argument count is 4. So, here the vector is 0, index 1, and then 2, and then 3. Okay. So, what should I do? Till the argument count, that means I equals 2, starting from here till I less than 4. Okay. I less than 4, that means till 3. Okay. I have to repeat this. What should I repeat? I have to retrieve the group ID of the file, and then I have to call the chown function, and using this function I am changing the user ID of all these files. Okay. So, that is why in general we have taken it as I equals to. So, that is why here it is argv of I. So, when I am changing the user ID of s1.text, in that case I value will be 2, and when I am changing the user ID of s2.text. In that case, argv value will be, I value will be 3. So, argv of 3 will be the second file. Okay. So, this is how the chown API works. Okay. Now, let us look into the next API. Next API is uTime API. Okay. So, this function or this API is used to modify the access time and the modification timestamps of a file. Okay. So, we have already discussed when we were explaining the when I was explaining the file attributes of a file, there are last access time and then last modification time. Those are the file attributes that are available with a particular file. Okay. Using this function, we can modify that access time and the modification timestamps of a file. So, this is the prototype. We have the uTime. These are the include statements. The name of the function is uTime, and the return type is integer. So, the possible return values are 0 or -1. So, the return value will be 0 if this function is executed successfully, and the return value will be -1 if there is any error. Okay. There are two parameters or two arguments. The first one is the path name. Okay. The path name specifies the name of the file on which we have to modify the access time and the modification time. Okay. The second argument is the struct uTimeBuff type of variable. So, star times. Actually, this is a structure that contains two members. So, I have written here. So, the structure struct uTimeBuff, two members, one is access time and another one is modification time. Both are of the type time underscore t. This time underscore t is a data type. So, nothing but it contains an unsigned long value. So, it contains the number of seconds starting from the birthday of Unix. So, when was the Unix invented? So, it was on 1st Jan 1970, 12 AM, right? So, this data type is nothing but unsigned long that contains the number of seconds that is elapsed since the birthday of Unix, that means since this date and time. Okay. So, in the given program, in the program, if I am just making use of the function uTime, so here for the second argument, if I am passing it as null, in that case the access time and the modification time will be set to the system's current time. Okay. If I am passing null as the second argument when I am calling this uTime function, in that case what will happen? The modification time and the access time will be set to the system's current time. Okay. So, if I am passing a variable of type struct uTimeBuff, then in that case the access time and modification time will be set to the value which I am passing of this type. Okay. Anyways, this structure contains the two members. One is access time and another one is the modification time. So, this is all about uTime. So, till here we were discussing about the different Unix file APIs. Okay. So, close API, open API, and then read, write, okay, access, fstat, stat, lstat, chmod, fchmod, and then chown, fchown. Okay. So, we have discussed most of the APIs. So, we will look into the next concept. Next concept is file and record locking. Okay. So, this is one of the most important concept that has to be understood very well when we were studying about the Unix operating system. Okay. So, we already know that Unix is a multitasking operating system. That means more than one process can be executed simultaneously. That means more than one processes will be executing concurrently. Okay. Anyways, the process will be executing simultaneously, but there is a difficulty if whenever a process is executing and then another process is also performing same operation on that particular file. In that case, it might override the data that is present in the file. Okay, hope you are understanding. Since multiple processes are executing at the same time, let us say that one process is performing the read operation on a particular file and another process is trying to perform write operation on the same file. In that case, what will happen? The another process will override the data that is present in the file, causing the difficulties for the processes. Okay. So, in order to overcome this drawback, file locking mechanism was introduced. Okay. File locking mechanism came into picture. So, file locking mechanism here, a process can impose a lock on a particular file. So, how it works, the file locking mechanism? A process can impose a lock on a particular file. It can impose a lock on a particular region of the file also. So, you remember that process can impose lock only on a portion of a file or complete file. Okay. Actually, there are two types of lock. There are two types. One is write lock and another one is read lock. So, write lock and then read lock. Here the difference is whenever a process imposes a write lock on a file, okay, in that case it will block other processes to perform read or write operation on that file. Okay. So, I will repeat once again, whenever a process imposes a write lock on a file or a write lock on a particular region of a file, it will block other processes to perform read or write operation on that file. Okay. So, in the second case, that is read lock, whenever a read lock on a file is set, in that case, so that process which has acquired lock on that file will block the other processes to perform write operations on that file. Okay. So, this is the difference between write lock and read lock. So, here write lock is referred as exclusive lock, whereas read lock is referred as shared lock. So, this is because I already told you, in case of write lock, the process, whenever if it imposes write lock on a file, it will block the other processes performing read or write operation on that file. Okay. So, that is why it is exclusive lock. Whereas read lock, when a process imposes read lock on a file, it will block the other processes performing write operations on the file. But read operation can be done by the other processes on that file. Okay. So, that is why it is referred as shared lock. Okay. So, now another point, the lock has to be mandatory lock. So, if it is enforced by the kernel itself, so sometimes the lock has to be mandatory. Okay. So, the locks should be mandatory lock if it is enforced by the kernel. So, in that case, what will happen? Whenever a mandatory exclusive lock is set on a file by a process and the process will never unblock that file, so what will happen? Other processes will be waiting for this file, this process to unlock the file. If this process never unblocks the file, in that case this file will be no longer used. Okay. So, in that case the system has to be rebooted or else the process has to be killed to make use of this file by other processes. So, this will happen when a mandatory exclusive lock is set. In order to overcome this, advisory locks are preferred. Okay. So, in order to overcome this, advisory locks are preferred. In case of advisory locks, the kernel at the system call level will not enforce this advisory lock. Okay. So, here even though if a process has imposed advisory lock on a file, so it will not restrict other processes to perform read or write operations. Okay. That is why the kernel at the system call level will not enforce advisory lock. So, kernel will always enforce the mandatory lock, and also I told you the drawback with respect to mandatory lock also. So, now this is about the advisory lock. In order to use this advisory lock properly, so the process has to perform it has to follow the 3 steps procedure. The first step is, so the process will request for a lock on a particular region of a file, and then and it will wait. Okay. So, first it will try to lock the file and then it will wait. If it is unsuccessful, if there is any failure, in that case the process can perform any other something else operation, some other operation, and then request the lock once again. So, that is the first step. So, first step says that a process will request for the lock on a particular region of a file, and if it is not successful, if the request for the lock is not executed properly, in that case the process can perform some other operation and then return later and then request to impose the lock on that particular region of the file. That is first step. Second step, if the lock is successful, okay, so read or write operations can be performed by that process on the file. So, if the lock is successful, read or write operation can be performed by the process on that file. And the third step is, after performing the operation, so what has to be done? The lock has to be released. So, the lock has to be released, that means the file should be unlocked. So, this is the procedure for a process to follow when it has to apply a lock. Okay. So, the first step is the process has to request for the lock on particular region of a file and it has to wait. If there is any failure, the process can perform some other action, some other operation, and then request once again for the lock. And second step says that if the lock is successful, the process can perform read or write operations on that particular file. And third step, it has to unlock the file. So, next, this is about the advisory locks. Actually, there are two concepts, lock promotion and then lock splitting. Lock promotion concept says that, so let us assume that there is a file, so 0 to 512, okay, let us assume like that, and there is a write lock on that file from the position 0 to 128, okay. So, there is a read lock, okay. Let us assume that a process has imposed a read lock on this file from the position 0 to 128, from the size 0 to 128, okay. At the same time, the same process imposes write lock okay. At the same time, the same process imposes the write lock on the complete file, that means 0 to 512, okay. In that case, this read lock will be overridden by the write lock. So, this read lock will be overridden and then there will be only a write lock for this complete 0 to 512 bytes in the file. So, this concept is called lock promotion. So, there is another concept, lock splitting. Furthermore, right now this file is having only the write lock, Okay. So let us assume starting from 128 to 480, the lock is released. Assume that this portion of the file, the lock is released. Okay. Anyways, the process has applied the write lock from 0 to 512, but here from 128 to 480, the lock is released. In that case, what will happen? So the same write lock will continue from 0 to 127, and then the write lock will continue from 481 to 512. So that means here the write lock was on complete 0 to 512, and from the 128 to 480 the lock is released. In that case, so the write lock is splitted into two write locks, that is from 0 to 127 and then 481 to 512. So here only 128 to 480 region will be released from the lock. This concept is called lock splitting. Okay, so this is all about lock promotion and lock splitting. So in Unix system, we can make use of the API fcntl to impose a lock on a particular file. Okay, so now let's discuss how we can impose a lock by using this fcntl function. So in the previous session already we have discussed about fcntl function to perform some other operations already, but the same function can also be used to impose a lock on a particular file or a particular region of a file. So the prototype is like this: fcntl, the file descriptor. Okay, the first argument says the file descriptor on which file the lock has to be imposed, and the second argument tells what action to be performed, and the third argument depends on the second argument. So here the return type is integer. So the possible values are 0 if it is executed successfully, -1 if there is any error. Okay. So this is the command flag. There are three values. One is f_set lock. So here if this is enabled, it will set the lock, but it will not block other processes performing the read and write operation. The second one, fset lkw. Here if this option is enabled, so the process will impose a lock on the file, but it will block the other processes performing read or write operations. In this case it will not block other processes, but in this case it will block the other processes. So last one, get lk, that means to retrieve the information of the lock. So the third argument is a variable of type struct flock. So these are the members of this struct flock. Okay, so the members are which is of type short, L_type that decides the type of the lock, L_whence, this is a reference so to the next field. Okay, it's a reference to the next field, and then L_start. So this is an offset that has to be added to this L_whence. Okay, and then L_len indicates the how many number of bytes has to be locked by the process, and the last one, PID, it's a process ID of the process which is imposing lock on the file. Okay, so the third argument is of type struct flock. So the possible L type values are f_rd lck, that means read lock, and then f_wr lck indicates write lock, and then f_un lck, that means unlock. So these are the possible values for types of the lock. So next, these are the possible values for L_whence variable here. So if it is seek_current CUR, in that case the L_start will be added to the current position. Okay, if it is seek_set In this case, the L start value will be added to the starting position and seek end. So here the L start value will be added to the end of the file, I mean the last position of the file. So these are the possible values for the L-vens, and these are for L-type values. Okay. So in today's class we have discussed about the APIs like chown, fchown and then lchown, and then next utime. Okay. So then we started with the concept of file and record locking. So we have discussed most of the concepts and we got to know that the fcntl function can be used to acquire a lock on a particular region of a file or a complete file. So in the next class, in the next session, we shall discuss a program how a lock can be imposed on a particular region of a file. Hope you have understood today's concepts. Thank you.